His initial demeanor was he was angry because he was in jail. He then became defensive towards questions.
At some point, Mr. Gebhardt did calm down and you were able to start questioning him, correct?
Yes, sir, that's correct.
Okay. And one of the first questions I think he was asked was whether he had, or whether Christopher Vaughn had talked to him. Is that right? All right. Whether Mr. Vaughn had said anything to him.
Yes, sir, that is correct.
And I believe Mr. Gebhardt's response was no.
Yes, sir.
But Mr. Gebhardt had just been in the cell with Mr. Vaughn. Mr. Vaughn was talking to him about the case, isn't that right?
Yes, sir, that's correct.
Were there times that you noticed Mr. Gebhardt deflecting questions that you asked him?
Yes, sir.
What were some of the times that you noticed that he deflected
Well,
questions that you asked him?
Yes, sir. During direct questioning, as you heard, he would threaten lawsuits. He was going to call his sister and so forth. I took that as he was getting the attention off of himself and off
I'm
of...
going to object. This is speculation. I have no idea why Mr. Gebhardt may have said those things.
Well, why he said it too, but he can restate what was said, but not why it was said.
Captain Morris, particularly later on in the interview, you were showing photographs to Mr. Gebhardt of the victim in the case, Timothy Coggins. Is that right?
That's correct.
I'm going to show you what's previously been tendered as States Exhibits 3 and 26. Are those the photographs that you were showing Mr. Gebhardt?
Yes, they are.
In particular, States Exhibit number 3. The picture of Mr. Timothy Coggins at the morgue, correct?
Yes, sir.
States Exhibit number 26 was a picture of Mr. Coggins in the field. Is that right?
That's correct.
What was Mr. Gebhardt's demeanor when you showed him those photos?
Defensive.
And in fact, did he deflect your questioning at that time?
Yes, sir. There was a period where Mr. Gebhardt made, he became the victim, where he referred to his incarceration as being operated on and having surgery.
Also, during your interview, Mr. Gebhardt at times wanted to know the names of the people that had told these things about him. Is that right?
Yes, sir. That's correct.
And in fact, he even asked for paper and a pen to write their names down, right?
That's correct.
Even though he had earlier said he couldn't read or write.
Yes, sir.
Captain Morris, you indicated earlier that you've investigated 1,000+ cases.
Yes, sir.
A lot of those have been homicides.
That's correct.
Have you ever had a confession that you can remember in a homicide case?
A direct "I did it"? No, sir.
Okay. Is that common?
No, sir.
That's all my questions are. Chair.
You may cross.
Thank you. How long would you say you've been doing this all tomorrow?
20 years?
Yes, sir.
And we know each other. Is that
Yes, we
fair to
do.
say?
Yes, we do.
All right. Known me for a lot of those 20 years, is that correct?
Yes, sir.
And you're certified and you're an expert, or not an expert, but you've been trained in interview techniques, I guess, and you're an instructor.
That's correct.
Okay. And so you got together with your instructor certification, and you got together with Agent Coleman to do a sting operation using the child molester, Mr. Vaughn, right?
That is correct.
Okay. And that was to try to get Mr. Gebhardt to confess to a murder. Is that right?
To see if we could get a recording of Mr. Gebhardt mentioning anything about it.
Right. And you did have the opportunity to ask, I think we all heard, as far as Mr. Gebhardt's education level. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay. And Mr. Gebhardt told you that the last grade he completed in school was 6th grade?
That's what he said.
Okay. And do you have any reason to doubt that?
No, sir.
Did you investigate that to see if that was true?
If that's as far as he went in school with
Yes.
6th grade? No, sir.
Oh, I mean, his education level's important, isn't it?
Well, that's what he said. He went to 6th grade, so he could speak to us and understand what we were saying, so.
And I understand that. I guess, again, you don't have any reason to doubt that, right?
No, sir.
Okay. And did you test him as far as his reading and writing abilities?
You mean, did I give him a written exam on reading and writing, or?
Was there any sort of, to see whether or not he was proficient at reading and writing or anything like that?
Well, I guess if someone wants to say they can't read and you were to show them a book, all they got to do is say, I can't read it, so I don't know that that would be feasible.
I understand. A 59-year-old man, I guess, and I'm not trying to, a 59-year-old man with a 6th grade education, if he tells you he can't read and write, there's no reason to doubt that, really, is there?
At the time, no.
Okay. Well, and he could sign his name to something, is that correct?
I didn't see him sign his name in it.
Okay. And again, I'm just trying to get that it's not out of the ordinary that a 59-year-old man with a 6th grade education may not be able to read and write or do it very well. Is that right?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And so you and Agent Coleman, and you had somebody else was in the room, was it Officer Harris?
I believe he came in the room later on in the interview.
Okay. And so y'all sent Mr. Vaughn into the cell, wired up to get Mr. Gebhardt to talk about a murder, right?
That's correct.
And he never
If you could
did.
readjust that
I'm sorry.
microphone, I think it's gotten pushed.
Okay.
There you go.
And he never did, is that right?
I'm sorry, can you repeat that question?
He never talked about his having any knowledge of this murder, is that right?
No direct knowledge, no, sir.
Okay, and said, I believe the most he said was he remembered that some people finding a body. Is that fair to say?
Yes, sir.
Okay, and he might remember that because the people that found the body were people that he knew. Is that correct?
Well, I don't know what he, I can't speculate as to what he knew.
Oh, okay. You didn't have any information that he knew and grew up with Charles Carey Jr.?
Oh, yes, sir, I knew
Okay.
that.
And Charles Carey Jr. was one of the ones that found the body?
That's what he said, or that's what's been said, yes, sir.
You don't have any reason to doubt that, do
No,
you?
sir.
Okay. And Willard Sanders, was he there?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And these are people that Frankie Gebhardt knew and grew up with, is that right?
That's correct.
Okay. And y'all actually plotted out strategy and spent quite a good deal of time coming up with different scenarios, and this is what you can say to him to do this, and this is what you can say to him to do that. And This is how you get him to talk and stuff like that, right?
Yes, sir, we did strategize.
Okay. And then the totality of an hour and 20 minutes was that Frankie Gebhardt, with a sixth grade education, didn't admit to anything. Didn't seem to know about anything. Is that correct?
Well, he said he would play dumb.
He said he was dumb, didn't he?
He just said he wasn't going to tell us anything.
He said many times he wasn't going to tell you anything he didn't know about, right?
Yes, sir.
So it's not just in the isolation of I'm not going to tell you anything. I don't know a damn thing about it. Is that a fair and accurate quote? Numerous times.
Yes, sir. He did deny knowledge several times.
Okay. And never indicated that he had knowledge. Is that correct?
As far as for speaking with people about it at a party, or I'm trying to understand which part you're
As far
talking
as you
about.
asked him if he had talked about it at a party, right?
He said he couldn't remember. Right.
And in the interview, when you and Agent Tolman were talking about it,
Okay.
and you were talking to him.
Okay. Let me get to that one. What page are you on?
Just a second, let me find it. Did you're numbered as well?
I numbered mine.
I numbered mine as well. Just to be on the safe side. Starting like on page 13, I guess, is what struck me.
Okay.
You said that during those years you were drinking.
Where are you at on page 13?
I'm sorry, I apologize, at the top of the page. The very first where it starts, and during those years you were drinking, as you said, sort of at the bottom of that first paragraph. Lord, I hope our numbers are the same, or we're fixing to have a problem.
During those years where you were drinking, as you just said, is that what you're talking about?
Yes.
Okay.
yes.
We're tracking.
Was there ever a chance that you might have talked about the murder or talked to somebody about the murder?
Yes, sir, I asked him that.
So you're asking Frankie, did at some time in a party, after people you know had just found a body of somebody that had been murdered, and whether I'm at a party a few days, weeks, or something later, and I might have talked about it?
Yeah, it was at this point in the interview that I actually suggested or was going to give Frankie the chance to say, maybe I said it. Maybe, as you can see, I use the example of maybe sometimes people say things to make themselves look bigger or badder than they really are.
Right.
And maybe if you said it then, were you saying it just to take credit for something, to try to, bolster the fact that you may be bad or something like that? And his answer was, no, not that I know of.
Yes, his answer was no, not that I know of, because you're asking him, did you talk about a murder? Not did you tell a bunch of people that you committed a murder. Did I talk about a murder in 1983? I might have. We might have had a discussion about friends of mine or people that I knew finding a body. I don't know whether I did or not. Is that fair to say that that's the way that comes across? Did you talk about a murder? Not did you talk about, did you kill somebody?
I don't know how it comes across to you. The way I was trying to explain it was, maybe you confessed, or maybe you said you told someone or talked about it to try to make yourself look better than you are. That's how I was coming across.
Okay, and you understand what I'm saying is you're talking to somebody with a sixth grade education and you're saying, did you talk about a murder? We've been all talking about a murder. Right? I mean, that's different than saying, did you confess to one in 1983?
Yeah, confessing and talking about it is two different things.
Right, that's what I'm saying, and that's what you're asking him is, and he's going, I don't know if I talked about a murder.
Well, his answer was, not that I know of.
Well, right, not that I know of. And you asked, so you never told anybody about the murder, right?
I did ask that direct
Okay.
question.
But again, there was a body found by people that he knew, so wouldn't it sort of make sense that a lot of people had been talking about it?
Well, when I asked, so you've never told anybody about the murder, I would think that if he had talked about it, he would say, yeah, I've talked about it, but he said, not that I know of.
Right. And if it were, and that under ordinary circumstances may be, but you're talking to a man that you know has a sixth grade education, right?
That's what he said.
And you don't have any reason to doubt it,
No, sir.
right? And you're talking about 33, 34 years prior to this with in a group of people, or with him admittedly being drunk and drinking a lot, right?
On this particular one right here,
Well, I mean, he's told you at some point that he was drunk for 23 years, right?
at some point in the interview, he said that. That's
Okay.
correct.
And again, on page 14, you said about the third or fourth statement down. Do you think during this time that you were drinking that you might have talked about the murder? And you just don't remember?
And his answer was, nah, I can't say. I ain't going to say because I don't know.
Right. I ain't gonna say because I don't know. That I talked about something. Right? That's what his was responding to is, did I talk about something? Right?
Yeah, about it.
Right, about it. Okay. And you also, y'all told Mr. Gebhardt that you found some hairs, is that correct?
We did.
You found some hairs from a Caucasian, right?
Yes, sir.
And was that true?
At the time, that was just an interview tactic done.
I understand, but was it true that some hairs had been found?
A hair had been found, that's correct.
Exactly. But the hair no longer existed, right?
At this point, no, sir.
Okay. And you didn't tell him that, you just told him that some hairs had been found, right?
I didn't tell him anything about the evidence.
You didn't tell him that some hair had been found?
I told him that, that's correct.
Okay, well, you didn't tell him anything about the lost evidence. Yes, I understand that. But you told him some hair had been found, right?
I did.
Okay. And Mr. Gebhardt's response was, do you want one of mine? You want two of mine? You want three of mine? I don't give a damn. I ain't got nothing to do with it. Wasn't that his response?
It was.
So he volunteered to give you some of his hair, right?
He did.
Okay. Kind of the same way as when you told him somebody said something about a knife in a well.
What page are you
On
on?
page 18, I apologize. and somewhere in the middle, when Mr. Gebhardt is asking about who the people are that are giving this information or telling you these stories, and Mr. Gebhardt says, I need to know who these people is. Will y'all come out there and dig my damn well up? You're welcome to. You can put me in a nice hotel. Come out there and dig my damn well up. Will that solve it? Isn't that what he said?
He did.
Okay. And again, at the bottom, come dig my damn well up. I don't care. So he volunteered to give hair for you to dig up well, and he denied knowing anything about this, right?
He did.
Okay. And then y'all showed him a picture of, what picture were you showing him to get him to identify whether or not he knew the victim in this case?
The pictures that I formally identified.
Right. And you've been here through the testimony throughout the whole trial, is that correct?
I have.
Okay, and you heard Oscar Jordan testify?
Yes, sir, I did.
Okay, and you heard Mr. Oscar Jordan testify that he knew Timothy Coggins, right?
Yes, sir.
Okay, and he was involved in the investigation, at least initially, because he knew Mr. Coggins and his family, is that correct?
That's correct.
And do you remember Oscar Jordan testifying that he couldn't identify him either from those?
Yes, sir, I remember that.
Right. You remember Mr. Oscar Jordan was out there, I believe, at where the body was found and couldn't identify him. Is that correct?
He said that, yes, sir.
Okay. So a man intimately familiar with the victim couldn't identify him from the pictures you were showing to Frankie Gebhardt, right?
He said he could not identify him by those pictures. That is correct.
Okay. And Jesse Gates as well. Do you remember Mr. Gates also testified he couldn't identify him from the picture as well?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And Jesse Gates knew him, right?
Said he did.
Okay. You believe he didn't?
No, I believe what he said.
Oh, okay. Right, you said he did, and you don't have any reason to doubt that, right?
That's correct.
Okay. Let me ask you this. There was a lot of talk when you're doing this sting or this wiring Mr. Vaughn up and getting him to go in and try to get some sort of grand confession or admission or something out of Mr. Gebhardt, that you're talking about, well, say so-and-so about knife in a well, or say something about this or that. Is that correct? I mean, basically it's strategizing as to what he might say to elicit a response.
That's correct.
And those things are based on what Mr. Vaughn, those pieces of information are things that Mr. Vaughn told in his story to you and Agent Coleman, right?
Well, according to Mr. Vaughn, he had previously spoken with Gebhardt, and so we were trying to determine what would be best suited for him to talk about.
Right. And so I guess what I'm saying is those things and those particular facts that he's supposed to say to elicit a response depend on whether those things were true in the first place, right? Because if none of this stuff about knife in the wells and things like that are true, or admitting it to me at a party are true, then they would not elicit a response, right?
I'm not sure what you mean by that.
I guess what I'm saying is if Mr. Gebhardt don't know any of these things because the things that Mr. Vaughn told you weren't true, that would explain why he didn't know nothing about them, right?
The attempt was,
That causes speculation.
If we're not going to speculate on one side, we won't on the other.
Yeah. you were with Agent Coleman when he interviewed several of the other witnesses in the case, is that correct?
Yes, sir.
And you were there in an interview on August the 16th of 2017 with an interview with Jonathan Bennett, is that correct?
Yes, sir, that is correct.
And you heard Jonathan Bennett testify when he testified at trial, is that correct?
I did.
Okay, and you heard Jonathan Bennett say he had heard these stories all his life, is that right?
Yes, sir.
And you heard Jonathan Bennett say he'd heard them from 40 or 50 different people.
I don't remember exactly how many people he said he heard them from, Mr. Lee.
I understand that. If you don't remember that part, I understand. And you recall Mr. Bennett saying that Gebhardt told him that they were riding around at Ponderosa and heard a woman being raped, and they found a colored guy raping a white woman?
Yes, sir.
Okay. You remember him saying that? And then you talked to Willard Sanders, is that correct?
I did.
And you and Agent Coleman talked to Willard Sanders, right?
We did.
And you recall Willard Sanders telling you that this was some sort of drug deal?
Yes, sir, I did.
Okay, so Bennett's saying somebody was getting raped, and Willard Sanders is saying it was a drug deal. Is that correct?
He said that's what he heard, it was a drug deal.
Right. Yes. And then you remember, were you in an interview with Mr. Reed, another inmate from the Spalding County Jail?
I was.
Okay. And do you remember that Mr. Reed's story was that Mr. Gebhardt had told him they cut the victim's penis off and put it in his mouth?
That's correct.
Okay. You remember him testifying up here too in court, in trial,
I do.
and him saying he didn't know anything about that?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So that would make him untruthful? Is that what
Mr. Young, let's comment on credibility of the witness.
Sustained. Sustained.
That's promised for them. So he testified to something different than he told you, is that right?
That is correct.
Okay. You also got a chance to listen to Mr. Reed. He also gave you some more information while y'all were talking to him, right? About a jailer or a guard passing along information, is that correct?
Yes, sir, that is correct.
Okay. And did you, and that caught your attention? That's a serious accusation, is it not?
Yes, sir, it is.
Okay. And so did you thereafter have a chance to investigate whether that jailer or officer had passed along information?
I got a picture of the detention officer to identify who Mr. Reed was talking about.
Okay, and did you later, were you later part of the investigation into whether that information had been passed, as in an interview with detention officer Whitmer?
I remember there was an investigation, an inquiry into Mr. Reed's testimony on that, or statement to us on that.
That's fine. And I guess what I'm asking, and I don't have that report, were you part of the investigation, though, and interview of Officer Whitmer?
I think I was.
Okay, and...
It's hard to say, we interviewed so many people. Do you have that I can reflect to?
Let me get it,
Okay.
let's be fair. Lord, was right here. May I approach?
Yes, sir.
Would it help if you refresh
Yes,
your
sir.
memory from? You know, does that refresh your memory?
It does.
And as part of that investigation into that accusation made by Mr. Reed, or based on what Mr. Reed told you, you did not find his allegation to be accurate, is that correct?
The allegation against Deputy Whitmer
Yes.
as far as for Deputy Whitmer not having any involvement with what?
Right. Mr. Reed said this officer's also passing along information to Frankie Gebhardt and God knows who else. You didn't find that to be the truth or accurate, I guess?
We could not sustain that, no, sir.
Okay. And you were present during interviews with Robert Smith, another inmate at Spalding County Jail, is that correct?
I was.
And were you present for that interview with Agent Coleman in May of 2017, May 9th of 2017?
I was.
Okay. And you heard Robert Smith come in and testify about parties at a trailer park over on Wood Road, is that
That's
correct?
correct.
And he mentioned that in his May 9th of 2017 interview, right?
He did.
And it's fair to say, not to state the obvious, May 9th of 2017 is about, a little more than a year ago, right?
Yes, sir.
And based on your investigation, Robert Smith approached another investigator to want to talk to y'all, right?
That's correct.
Okay, so he was seeking to talk to somebody about what he knew, right?
That's how it was brought to me, yes, sir.
Okay, so that, when he sat down, he knew what he was there to talk about, right?
Yes, that he had information pertaining to this case.
Okay. You knew what he was there to talk about, right?
I did.
Okay. And so you and Agent Coleman asked and received the information that he had to offer, right?
We listened to his statement, and that was the information that he gave.
Okay. And you were there to obtain whatever, any and all and full information that he had regarding this case, right?
That is correct.
Okay. You asked him questions, is that correct?
We did.
Okay. And Mr. Smith said that he went to parties where Mr. Gebhardt was present at a trailer park out on Wood Road, right?
That is right.
Okay. And did Mr. Smith then ever tell you that the victim in this case, Timothy Coggins, was at any of those parties?
No, he never said he was at those parties.
Never said that Timothy, and you heard, that was his testimony when he testified at trial a day or two ago, right?
What testimony are you talking about?
Did you hear Mr. Smith testify that the victim, Timothy Coggins, was at 3 out of 5 of the parties he went to at a trailer park on Wood Road?
You're referring to the testimony this week.
Yes, I am. I'm referring to the testimony this week, that Mr. Smith got up And do you recall his testimony that the victim in this case, Timothy Coggins, was at parties at that trailer park with him and Franklin Gebhardt on Wood Road?
Yes, sir.
Okay. That's not something he mentioned to you at all a year ago or a year or so ago, right?
That is correct.
Is it fair to say that that is a crucial, important detail as an investigator in this case?
Well, I don't know at the time. I don't think we asked him, or I'm sure we didn't ask him if Tim was there. We listened to what he said about the murders.
Right. You didn't ask him whether he was there, and he didn't give you any information of that sort, right?
He told us about what he had heard from Gebhardt.
Right. And I appreciate that, but he didn't give you that information that we just talked about.
He didn't tell us that Tim Coggins was at any of the parties. No, he didn't.
And he didn't tell you then about somebody chasing Mr. Coggins into a trailer, and then Mr. Coggins being scared and getting chased into a trailer?
No, sir, he didn't say that either.
Is it just me, or did you find that to be a crucial, important piece of information that was he neglected to give you a year ago when you interviewed him about information that he wanted to give you?
Well, as he also said, sometimes you remember things later on. That's what he gave me then. That's what we listened to, and that was the statement.
It also, do you remember when he added that to the story?
Which part?
The part about Mr. Coggins being there. That's the only part I'm talking about. That Mr. Coggins was at the parties, that Mr. Coggins was being chased by somebody, those things. That's what I want to know. When did that get added to the story from his initial volunteering to give you information?
It is not in this interview.
Right. But it got added when he testified at trial, is that correct?
I'm just gonna ask and answer at this point.
Have you heard it before trial
No, sir.
today? Okay, move on,
And that's
please.
that's what so then he also then testified at trial as to Frankie Gebhardt was out butchering a cow. Do you remember that?
I remember that.
A year ago when you interviewed him, with him begging and asking to give information to you and your friends at the sheriff's department, he had mentioned a thing about that, did he?
Nothing was mentioned about butchering a cow.
So the first time you heard that was when he took the stand?
That is correct.
Okay. And Mr. Smith was locked up when you talked to him?
He was.
All right, you were also present during interviews of Christopher Vaughn, is that correct? Some of them.
Some of them.
Yes.
Correct.
And were you familiar, you had reviewed the old case file in this case, right?
Somewhat. You talking about early on or when?
From whenever I'm talking about as far as old reports, anything, did you review those, go over those, familiarize yourself with the case, I'm saying?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And you had familiarized yourself, is it fair to say that Mr. Vaughn had been interviewed before?
Yes, sir.
And is it fair to say that Mr. Vaughn had been interviewed in 2007?
June 25th, is that the one you're referring to?
April 25th of 2007 by Agent Durham of the GDI. And if you're not, want to know if you're familiar that he was interviewed at that time.
Are you speaking of Special Agent Charles Durham interview? Okay.
Are you familiar that he was interviewed by
Yes,
Agent Durham
yes,
at that time?
yes.
Okay. And are you familiar that in March 11th, 2008, he was interviewed by Agent Sam Beatty of the GBI?
Yes, sir.
And then he was interviewed again April the 26th, excuse me. He was interviewed again October 27th, 2015 by Agent Gebhardt of the GBI.
That's correct.
So we got 07, 08, 2015, and then April 26th of 2017 by Agent Coleman and Hatchett of the GBI. Are you familiar that that interview took place?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Were you present at the April 26th interview?
Not according to this report.
I was about to say, I don't see your name there, so I don't believe you. What about May 3rd of 2017? Was he interviewed again, this time with you and Agent Coleman?
Yes, sir, my name's on this one.
And all this, let me back up a little bit. This talk about Broadway Street and Broadway Grocery and things like that, it came up during when y'all sent in, excuse me, maybe when y'all were talking about sending Mr. Vaughn in and going through the questions with him. It kept coming up about Broadway Grocery and Broadway Street, did it not?
Yeah, there was information in the old case file that suggested Broadway. At the time, I really didn't know. There was talk about it, and we were just trying to get any information we could on it.
Right. And so the information had come up in the old file about something happening on Broadway.
There was talk about Broadway Grocery, there was.
Okay. And you heard Mr. Vaughn testify at trial, did you not?
I did.
Here at this trial. And you heard him say he never gave any information to Agents Durham or Beatty regarding anybody being picked up at the corner of Broadway and 2nd Street. Is that what he said?
I believe that's what he said.
Okay. But somebody's giving you information about Broadway, obviously, right?
Giving me or what we read in the case file?
Or what would have been in the case file? You got that information from somewhere, right?
That's correct.
Okay. And would it be fair to say that information was from Christopher Vaughn?
At which time?
Anytime. In his 07 interview? Or
Yeah, he had mentioned that, he had.
Okay, right. He had told them that supposedly the victim was picked up at the corner of Broadway and 2nd Street.
That's correct.
Right? But when he talked in his later interviews, there's no mention of that. Is that correct?
With me, no.
Right. Okay, and you can just testify as to what? You talked to him in April of 2017, and there's no mention of Broadway and 2nd Street, right?
Yeah, I can only testify to what he told me, the interview that I was present at.
Right. Because now, is it fair to say, it's gone from, they picked somebody up at Broadway and 2nd Street to I actually saw him at the trailer park. Is that what his testimony was? The night of the murder?
Yeah, his statement to me was that, as he said, he was sitting at the A-frame house at the trailer park and saw them leave.
Right. No mention about anybody being picked up at Broadway and 2nd Street anymore, right?
Correct.
And let me ask you this. In Christopher Vaughn's statement to you, Well, in his previous statements, he'd never mentioned about seeing Frankie Gebhardt and Timothy Coggins and Ruth Guy or anybody else on the night of the murder. Is that correct?
And all of the others, again, I
In his
wasn't at
initial
the,
statements, I'm sorry.
as to what he told the other agents.
Yeah, did your review of that reveal that he had ever said that before?
No, sir.
Okay. So that detail got added later on in the investigation, is that correct?
That's the first time that I spoke with him, that's when I heard it.
Right. But in your review of it, that detail got added later in the investigation, right?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Pretty crucial detail when you see the victim and the defendant on the actual night of a murder, right?
With them leaving the trailer park?
Yes, sir. I'm just asking, is that critical information that folks want to know?
Yes.
And left out didn't start until 2015 that he started telling that story, right? Is that right?
As far as it being a detail about who he saw him leaving with?
Yes.
Yes, that is important.
And it didn't come up suddenly until 2015, is that right?
That's when he told me.
Well, no, he told you in 2017.
I'm sorry, 17.
Okay. All right. Is it fair to say the story kept getting more detailed?
As to what facts?
As to any facts? In there being this amount of detail in 07 and 08, and then in 2015 to 17, there being this amount of detail, or this amount of detail. Is it fair to say there's more?
Again, what he told me is what I have in this report, or what is listed in this report.
I understand that, and I appreciate that. But once again, you've reviewed the whole file. You know what Christopher Vaughn has said from day one, that he started volunteering and waving his hand to talk to somebody. You know what he said, right?
That's correct.
Okay, and you know he's added more to the story as the years have progressed, right?
It has changed, yes, sir.
Yes, sir. And you recall well, because Mr. Vaughn wants to get out of jail, right?
I'm not object, because speculation.
I withdraw that. Mr. Vaughn told you he wanted to get out of jail, didn't he?
I believe he mentioned something about something to that effect, but I don't, no promises were made.
And I understand that. I know that.
I don't know anybody in jail that doesn't want to get out of jail, Mr. Lee.
I understand that, and I appreciate that. But he specifically mentioned, y'all maybe could help me with parole. Y'all maybe could get some consecutive sentences changed into some concurrent sentences, right?
I don't remember exactly what he said about that. I do remember a statement concerning that.
I apologize, Judge, could I at this moment? still got your transcript of your interview from the Christopher Vaughn operation?
I do.
Okay. You remember your pages too?
Not on these, but I can count.
Okay. And on page 14, where you got 14, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to do it. At the bottom, where he says that y'all could at least tell the parole board what I've done, what I've actually done.
And what's the question?
Do you see that?
I do.
And that was Mr. Vaughn asking you for help with the parole board. That's all I'm asking you, right?
Well, he says maybe you could at least tell the parole board what I've actually done.
Okay, right.
He didn't
wants
ask
you
me,
to help.
will you help him? He says maybe you can, so.
Okay. He wants you to help ask the parole board.
It was a suggestion.
It speaks for itself. Let's
And I'm sorry, but we're just semantics right now.
yes, sir, let's.
Did you also recall interviewing Mr. Vaughn, is that correct? Again, in the April 17 interview?
Yes, sir.
Excuse me, you were there in the May 3rd 17 interview. Is that correct?
At 2:17 p.m.
Right. Did he ask you for help in that interview? Let me withdraw that. Let me just, again, the bottom line is your understanding was he was trying to get help with getting some time cut off his sentence. Is that correct?
No, sir, I don't know that. The only thing Mr. Vaughn ever asked or ever mentioned was that about that parole thing that I recall,
That's the only thing he ever asked
that I
about?
remember,
Okay.
to me.
You don't recall him asking about concurrent and consecutive sentences? Maybe getting consecutive sentences changed to
That's your
concurrent?
Honor, it's been asked.
I'm just asking, does he recall, Judge? That's all.
And he's
And
already,
if he don't, that's fine.
Yes or no, do you recall?
I don't remember
Okay,
that.
Move- let's
that's
move.
fair enough. Hey, let me make sure I'm asking you about the right one. Yes, on the May 3rd, 2017 interview with Christopher Vaughn in which you were present. Mr. Vaughn has added the detail that he now saw Mr. Gebhardt and the victim together at the trailer park that night, right?
objection, Your Honor, I asked and answered.
I'm asking a different question, and I'm trying to follow up that with
Okay,
third and
well,
second
let's,
prong.
well, let's ask the question.
At that time, did you talk to him about this detail of seeing them the night of the murder, right?
I did.
Okay, and Christopher Vaughn noted that he had observed this at approximately 10 p.m. at night, right?
That's what he said.
Okay. 10 p.m. at night, 2 days prior to the finding of the body, is that correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And you heard his testimony during the trial again, did you not?
That's asked and answered.
Judge, I'm trying to follow it up with another question as to what, another detail.
We'll follow it up with a question.
Did you hear him testify that it was about 1 o'clock in the morning when he testified here?
I can't recall exactly what time he said.
Okay. If you don't recall, that's fine. But then it was 10, right?
It was 10 on here, yes, sir.
Okay. And that was May of 2017, May 3rd, right?
May 3rd, 2017.
Your Honor, I think that's all the questions I have for this time. Thanks.
Any redirect?
Just a few. Captain Morris.
Yes, sir.
Mr. Vaughn's been interviewed multiple times by multiple investigators, correct?
That's correct.
And each investigator's asked different questions of Mr. Vaughn, correct?
That's correct.
And in the interview in 2015 with Agent Sam Beatty, didn't Mr. Vaughn indicate that he saw Mr. Gebhardt and Mr. Moore and an unknown black male arguing in Gary's Mobile Home Park?
Let me get to that interview, Mr. Coker. Which one was that? Was that October 27th?
It was by Agent Robert Devane.
Okay, I have that.
October 27th,
Yes, sir.
2015. In that interview, didn't he say that he recalled seeing Gebhardt's old lady, and an unidentified black male, and Bill Moore's wife, Brenda Moore, arguing outside the trailer?
Yes, sir.
So he's been consistent that he saw Mr. Gebhardt and Mr. Moore arguing with a black male outside the trailer.
That's correct.
Now, turning back to the interview with Mr. Gebhardt. Specifically on page 29. You have it.
Yes, sir.
The top third of the page, you say, but that picture of that guy though, and then you're cut off by Mr. Gebhardt. Mr. Gebhardt says, I ain't never seen that picture, I ain't never seen that N-word, is that correct?
That's correct.
And later on in that interview, when you bring up information that you had received about Brenda Moore having slept with a black male, how was Mr. Gebhardt's demeanor at that point?
Scary.
What do you mean by that?
Well, he became really aggressive. I remember his body position changed. It was a fist clenching, and actually at the time, the way the interview room was positioned, he became so angry that I could tell that the mere thought of that angered him so bad that I thought he was going to become aggressive with us. Mr. Gebhardt was really stout, big fella, and interview room was small, and so I actually kind of positioned my body with the table and thinking he was fixing to come over the table.
He was angry.
He was.
He was angry at the thought of his sister having a relationship with a black male.
Absolutely.
That's all my question.
You said that, again, based on what Mr. Coker asked, you said that Mr. Vaughn was consistent with his statement, that he had seen him the night of the murder, right? That's what you just told him, right?
That he saw them arguing outside the trailer.
He was consistent with that story. Is that what your testimony just now was?
Mr. Coker asked me if Mr. Vaughn said that in an interview, and I said yes.
He just asked you, was Mr. Vaughn consistent in his story about them arguing outside the trailer on the night of the murder? Did he not just ask you that?
He did.
Oh, and you said that he was consistent with that story, right?
Yes, sir.
Did he mention it in 2007?
I don't remember when he mentioned it. The interview Mr. Coker just showed me was not 2007.
It was 2015, right?
That's correct.
Right. I guess what I'm saying is you knew about the 2007 interview and 8, right?
John, it may help if he's able to
And I-
refresh his recollection.
Yes, let's please help him.
I will.
Mr. Lee, I have it.
And
Give me it. 2007 and 2008, speaking.
yeah, let me, that's the 07 and 08 interviews? Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, and that's the ones I'm referring to.
Next question.
Based on those 2007 and 2008 interviews with Christopher Vaughn, who's asked to give information, did you find that he gave information that he saw Frankie Gebhardt and Tim Coggins on the night of the murder at the trailer park?
Nothing's listed in 2008. If you'll give me a minute, I'll reflect on 2007. You have to understand, Mr. Lee, I didn't become involved in this case until just a year or so ago.
I understand.
Case file is very thick. It's quite impossible to remember every spoken word that was said during this interview, so.
Yes, sir. I mean, I appreciate that, having gone through it myself.
Okay, so you were asking in 2007, did he say,
Did he say anything about them being at the trailer park and him actually witnessing Frankie Gebhardt and Timothy Coggins at the trailer park on the night of the murder?
not in 2007?
Right. So he didn't mention that part of the story in 07, he didn't mention it in 08, and the first time it came up was in 2015, according to your testimony, right?
That's correct.
That is not consistent, is it? In regard to that piece of information, let me put it that way, that's not consistent, is it?
The first time I heard about it was 2015,
Right.
or in the
You just
2015
testified he
case
was
file.
consistent in giving that information, that's not consistent, is it?
Well, as compared to,
If you say something every time you say it, that's being consistent.
he did not say that every time, if that's what you're asking.
Thank you, that's all the questions I have.
Okay, you may come down. Thank you.
Judge, could we, subject him to recall?
Yes.
Your Honor, please.
Yes, you may come down. Or you can call him as your own witness if you like.
Yes, thank you.
Okay. All right, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to, as I said, end early today. During this break, please leave your notes in the jury room. We'll see that they're locked up over the weekend. This is going to be a long weekend for you. Please, if you're approached about this case by anyone, please decline to discuss it or listen to anything about the case. If someone wants to talk to you about the case, explain to them that you may not do so. If someone insists on talking to you anyway, I mean, call police or anybody if somebody insists on it. Just don't allow anybody to compromise your position as a juror in this case, regardless of who they may be favored or favoring in this case. Please do not do any research, address any social media concerning this case or any internet site concerning this case or any legal subject or terminology, and just put it out of your minds for the weekend. We'll see you Monday morning at 9 o'clock. Thank you very much. Have a good weekend. Y'all have a seat, please. Mr. Gebhardt, it's been represented to me that that during the recent testimony that you have been observed trying to communicate with family members in the courtroom by gesturing or mouthing. it's inappropriate. It makes court security very nervous too. So I'm going to ask you to try to refrain from doing that. I'm not saying it was consciously done. Just please refrain from doing that. It might not be to your benefit for the jury to see that also. So just try to be aware of that and refrain from doing that in the future. Any other matters we need to take up at this time?
Your Honor, it was also brought to my attention that the victim's family was upset by some communication from the defendant. Is there any way we could reposition him so that that wouldn't happen again?
Can you be more specific?
During the interview, when the N-word was being said, it was represented to me that he was smiling and looking at the family, and it really upset them to the point where some of them were in tears. So I just think it could be solved if perhaps he wasn't facing them.
Let me ask that starting next week, maybe Mr. Larkin, that you swap places with your client.
You know, strategically, I was trying to communicate, I'm communicating more with Mr. Johnson than I am with Mr. Gebhardt during the
Okay.
trial.
Well, let's let Mr. Gebhardt have your, we can scoot the table down a little bit towards that way and let Mr. Gebhardt sit on this side of Mr. Johnson, Mr. Johnston.
Is there not enough room for him to sit like we're seated, the three of us like this?
And I'm, you know, I did not, I guess I was sitting next to him, but I'm not.
And I'm not saying, I'm not accusing Mr. Gebhardt of doing anything intentional. It's just, as I mentioned when we, well, as I mentioned at the beginning of the trial when I was, advising the audience that a lot of these things are unintentional and are just reactionary, and we need to, I'm trying to avoid that and any impact it may have on both the jury.
We will adjust it one way or the other to
Okay.
get a satisfactory conclusion as far as signature.
Okay. And I wish to advise anyone too that may be watching here in the audience or that may be watching a live stream, and that is there's to be no contact with any juror in this case. A lot of these jurors mentioned during the voir dire process where they worked or generally where they lived. It would be highly inappropriate for anyone to take up this weekend as a chance to go to an establishment where one of these jurors may work. I'm not a big believer at my age in coincidence, so we need to avoid these jurors as I have advised them to avoid y'all. And my last desire in this case is to charge anybody with jury tampering, so please don't approach any juror and do your best to avoid any place of business where a juror may appear this weekend. Anything else we need to address for either side? Okay. Once the jurors have cleared their parking spaces will be free to go.
John, can we approach for one more?
Yes, sir.
On the record?
It's on the it'll be on the record. Wait just a sec.
Be honest with you,
This is going to be on live stream too.
it's about another matter, actually. It's not really,
Do you want to take it up
yeah,
there?
if we can.
Okay, we can. Mr. Gebhardt, your attorneys have asked to take up a matter in chambers. Do you have any objection to that? Okay. I'll ask the court reporter to join us in chambers. Ms. Barber, if you will let the audience know as soon as the jurors have left the premises that we've discussed, at which time everybody will be free to go.